Well, the coronavirus continues to have all sorts of impact in terms of obviously the health ramifications, but also the financial ones. And our resident economist, Jamie Holroyd from Stratosfear, joins us to, well, try and give us some sort of clarity about what's going on. How are you, Jamie?
I'm good, Tom. Yourself?
Yeah, going all right in the circumstances. Confined at home, we're recording online, we're exercising the whole physical different distance thing and all the rest of the stuff. So doing the right thing. What's the latest? The big stimulus package has been announced by the government. The job keeper adds to the job seeker. What's the feedback you're getting in the marketplace, and what's your read of it?
Well, look, Tom, it's very, very fluid, right? It's very interesting. I always say when we're in a business, if you manage the noise, the screams will take care of itself. So I'm always attuned to the noise. Now, the job keeper things clearly hit the right spot. So everybody's talking about it. I've been out and about today, half a dozen businesses hitting the phones, and clearly, I think from a confidence point of view, it's giving people a bit of certainty in a very uncertain world at the moment. So people still digesting the detail. I just before, because I've been dashing around and I had to run past the supermarket because it's the only place I could find open to get something to eat. And even the checkout girls were talking about it, right? And, what do I get? How much does it work? I was just listening quite observantly without contributing. But I like to be a bit of a observer of people and what are they saying, what are they talking about, and what is their impression about how things work. Now, clearly, they weren't on top of it, but they were aware of it, right? So I think that's a big boost to confidence. So
there would appear to be only two topics of conversation around the place these days at this point. One of them being the I suppose the escalation of the health side of things with the coronavirus, about the spread, and that seems to be under some level of control in WA at this point in time, as long as you haven't been on a boat recently. But the economic side, certainly, the only two things you hear talking about is how many people can gather, how many people have got it, and how much money.
Yeah, look, if we start with the health aspect of it, it's quite interesting. After last week's episode, I just ironically had a phone hook up with my doctor just to talk about some of the health implications of coronavirus. Now, he has a quite different view than most people. So he mentioned that the death rate in Australia has been about 0.3%. So this is now something I've been tracking, right? So it's at about 0.4, 0.42, 0.43.
Yep.
Overseas, it's around 5%. Now, the reason for the difference, as according to my doctor, is that it's the health demographics of a country like Australia versus, for example, Italy, where we have an older demographic, we have a lot more smokers, we have different diet, different propensity heart disease. There's a whole bunch of demographic factors. So, it may not be as bad here as we expect, but I think also we're in the early stages too. So maybe there might be a bit of catch up. I'm not sure. But the death rate in Australia remains very, very low. So, which provides us with this, paradox of the consequence versus the impact on the economy, for example. So now we don't want to trade off, human life for financial expenses, but just put these things into context as to how do we respond to other situations that we have to deal with. So for example, every year that 353 people last year died in the road toll, but we don't ban cars and we don't have that kind of heavy approach. So the challenge with such an extraordinary event is it does throw up a whole bunch of anomalies, right? We're doing this here and that over there. And I think it's the same with the stimulus package, Tom, that no matter what you do, there's going to be things that don't make any sense, right? And so you get people who fall through the cracks. Now, the one thing that everybody's talking about is what has been the impact of revenue of my business directly attributable to coronavirus. Now, what you'll get is a whole bunch of perverse outcomes, right? I had that plumber had to come and fix something at my place the other day, with the hot water, and you only want to be paid in cash, right? And it wouldn't come otherwise. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that everyone's trying to downplay how much revenue they got. They're going to book it next month or whatever. So you get all these weird things that start to happen, and that's in a crisis situation. You're not going to get a perfect response. You need a response that's good enough for the moment, right? Now, some of the people are going to fall through the cracks, and we need to think about those people because they're already going through their own issues. So, and then to feel like the rest of the world and the rest of the economy is getting all this hand and assistance, you're not. So we've got to be very attuned to those sort of people. But the government's reacted pretty quickly. and pretty responsibly. So overall, I think people are a little bit, most people are pretty happy with the government response. Now, as you know, I'm not. I'm not because of the longer term financial aspect. I'm also been a little bit concerned about some of the, in WA, the Premier's rhetoric, almost go away, don't come back, we never want to see you. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we're not far off that. Whereas I've spoken to other people who've been wrapped with how heavy-handed he's been and how decisive. So, it depends on your perspective, I suppose. So,
I think from a leadership point of view, both the Prime Minister and the Premier, Mark McGowan, have probably stepped up to the plate a fair bit, a lot more than, and particularly in the case of Scott Morrison. I think most people thought at the start he was a little bit, what's he going to do? He probably didn't cover himself in glory during the bushfire crisis, and a lot of people were pretty concerned about how he was going to step up. But, credit where credit's due. I think the government has handled this pretty well. And equally, I think the opposition has actually done a pretty good job being really supportive and on track and going, yeah, we're not going to stand in the way. Yeah, okay, there's a few things that could be modified or altered, but overall, we support the concept. We're there. Having that sort of bipartisan approach, it's been a long time since we've seen that in Australia.
Well, look, it is interesting, right? And when you tune into the mainstream media, you've got to remember that your narrative is written by your opponents, right? And I think that's exactly what happened in the bushfires. I think in Australia with the coronavirus, from my vantage point, the opposition's almost invisible, right? I can't see them or hear them. And in a crisis, that's probably going to be the case. The difference in the United States is completely different, right? It's hyper political over there. Every decision that's made has some implication for the election coming up in November. So you got to expect that, but luckily we're not experiencing that too much over here. So now sometimes that might be good, and I know we all like bipartisanship, but sometimes, as we talked about last week, it's good to have a caring view and you tend to get the balance right when you do have a different opinion. So as people know, my opinion is about what's the longer term implications of this. We're dealing with the short term, but we also need to think about the long term. And, I found some of the stimulus package frightening, right, in terms of the money that's being spent. So it's hard to get the balance right. It's hard to be in government. So it's not an easy job, and it's easy to be a armchair critic sitting here. But it's not a job I'd envy, to be honest with you. So
no, very much so. The stimulus package itself, as far as the concept goes, from your perspective as an economist, the idea of actually paying a subsidy to people to companies to keep people employed so that connection remains and they're there long term. So, in 6 months, that's the figure that keeps on getting bandied around at the moment. When that happens, that they're there so that they're around the place and still connected and still got an income and everything else. Because effectively what they're doing is getting companies to pay what would otherwise be paid by Centrelink anyway, but getting it through the tax office and through the companies. There's some logic to that, isn't there?
Well, Tom, I hadn't heard that perspective, and I think that's a good one. So, look, a lot of things in business are full of paradoxes, right? So, I always use the example that life is very fragile. It doesn't take much to kill someone, right? They need to breathe for very long, or you can bleed for 5 minutes and die. At the same time, life is very resilient, right? And so it's these two paradoxical things at the same time, and it's very much like that in business. So critiquing the government's response. Now, the one thing that we do know is when unemployment gets high, and when I say high, from that 7 to 10%, it takes a long time to come down. Now, what is that? So, if I'm looking at the economic numbers, well, that's interesting. Now, what does it mean from a human perspective? That means someone doesn't work for 3 or 4 years. That means some people don't work again, right? And so I understand the need to try and keep a lid on unemployment and not letting it get out of hand. So I think that is imperative. I think that, from a business and an economic point of view, I'm very much focused on, what are the social aspects of that too, because the only reason to be in business and to run a good economy is so that we can lift the living standard of everybody as best we can. So
the figures, you mentioned that about the unemployment. The figures, a report I heard late this morning was saying that there were widespread predictions that if the second stimulus hadn't happened with this JobKeeper program, unemployment could have reached as high as 17%. and they're predicting now that it will be kept down to somewhere between 7 and 9 as a result of the JobKeeper program, which, the impact of that on the economy in terms of like reality, in terms of people being able to get jobs, and also just that confidence in the economy. I mean, it's a massive difference, 7 to 17.
Well, that's huge, right? And I'm sure anyone listening to this would have experienced 17% unemployment. I mean, 5%. We used to think we couldn't get it down to 5%. 7.5 is a fairly challenging number. 10's, you're in a recession, and 17 is almost unimaginable. But I think that just to put all this in context, that often when you roll out these initiatives, it causes more concern, right? So something terrible must be happening because we're doing all these things. So I'm kind of expecting now that, all the people that we talk to, we can't keep up with everything that's going on, right? Things are changing. There's new programs every day. So we'll go into a period of settling down, and then there'll be a bit of normalisation and people don't panic as much. But I think what's happening right at this moment is the economic impact is really starting to bite, right? So you've closed the shop, so it's only now that stores aren't restocking. It's only now that trucks aren't delivering things. So we'll certainly keep an eye on volumes through the Fremantle port. That gives us a really good sign of the health of the economy. That's changed fairly dramatically from what I can tell so far. And even just a really basic metric like, how long does it take me to get a container from the port if I want one? Well, it was a couple of days. Now it's a couple of hours, right? So that tells you that things have certainly quietened down. I've heard stories this morning of lawyers and accountants being laid off not because there's no work, but because the clients aren't paying. And if the clients aren't paying, we can't, pay for the staff. So we're starting to hear all these areas where you normally wouldn't expect things to happen. And I went just the other day and just had a blood test, and just as a checkup, as my age and my family history. But I was talking to the pathologist and sort of thinking, well, she must be secure in a job. And she mentioned, no, we're a private clinic and we're owned by people who own all the private hospitals, and with no elective surgery, we're being closed down, and so are many other centres. Now, that afternoon, I think you and I spoke that, the government had then come out with this partnership with public and private hospitals, which I would call more of a, rebadged bailout, really, because that sounds like what it was. So clearly a whole bunch of, the government response got to catch up to what they're doing. Now, I kind of stress this point, Tom, and I don't want people to think I'm too cynical, but we're having a government response to a government response, right? It's not the coronavirus that shut down the economy, it's the government's response to the coronavirus. And now we've got the government's response to their response to the coronavirus, right? So you just got to keep that in perspective. So
the companies that are trying to work through situations, obviously, there's the stimulus package. Most of that money won't flow through for at least a month. In some cases, the second part of the initial stimulus package, they're talking about July, so we're talking 4 months away. What can companies do in the interim? There's the situation about there's a moratorium on evictions from buildings, from tenants, for tenants. That's all fine, but the government sort of, in a way, have handballed that back to both residents and tenants to go, oh, we'll get on the front foot, go and speak to your landlord. In many cases, good luck with that one.
Well, look, I can tell you, Tom, that the things that we predicted last week are already happening, right? So we talked about the hypothetical where people might end up on COD. I've heard that story already this morning, right? People, you want your coffee beans, well, you're paying cash for them, right? You've not got any more terms. Is that I can tell you that the anecdotal response, when I say anecdotal, I've spoken to 5 or 6 people and I hear the same message, so I'm pretty comfortable that this is happening more broadly. No one's paying their rent. And if your lease is expired, well, I'm not signing a new one. So, and I'm going to be on a month-to-month lease. So that's clearly starting to unwind at the moment. Now, most landlords are reasonably leveraged. So, that's going to flow back to the banks, right? So the banks, I think the call on the banks is going to be much larger than people expected. So,
well, the situation with the banks is an interesting one, isn't it? Because really all they're doing at the end of the day is deferring. It's not as if they're actually foregoing any money. They're just foregoing when they get it, in that sense, aren't they?
Yeah, but on this scale, I'm not sure I can recall something like this, Tom. So, what I'm just not in a position to sort of comment too broadly on it because I don't want to kind of spook the horses. But you've got to think, well, their exposure's got to grow. What does that mean for capital? Australian bank's pretty well capitalised, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But we said this last week, and I hate using this word because I hate using words that everybody else uses, but it is a little bit uncharted, right? So we'll just have to see how it washes out.
The part of the banks here is quite important, isn't it? Because really that's going to be the lifeline. A distressed business, how does a distressed business put its case to a bank at the moment to go, hey, my income has either receded or in fact disappeared, but I want some more money? How do they put that case to?
Look, I use this sort of poor example, but as I've been talking to financiers, and no one particular on all of them, is really around the government's announcement of the government partially guaranteed, 50% guaranteed $250,000 loan. So when you ask me about the context of a distressed business, it's clear from all the bankers I've spoken to that they are struggling to get their head around their normal practice versus this new reality. Now, the new reality is we want to keep people employed. We want to save businesses. Bankers are struggling with the fact that this business was distressed before. Your distress has nothing to do with the virus, and that if you're drowning, well, you're going to drown, right? Now, I'm not sure I feel good about that, right? If I'm on the Titanic and there's 10 people on the water and I've got 8 life preservers and I'm throwing them to everybody except 2 people who can't swim, right? I would have thought the normal human response is you throw the first 2 to the people who can't swim, right? So now maybe I just have a different philosophy. Maybe the bank thinks that, well, we're saving businesses that might have died anyway. So as I mentioned, it's very difficult. I don't want to be too critical, but it's hard to have a one-size-fits-all response, right? And people haven't enough chance to digest, well, what is their response to this? Which is hopefully the next question you're going to ask me,
right? Pretty much, yeah.
Look, the reason I say that, Tom, is, and I sound like a cynic, and sometimes I don't like the sound of my own voice, but we went through the GFC. We had, SARS and swine flu. If you click on Netflix, there's movies about pandemics. So it's not like someone couldn't have said, well, if this happened, what would we do? And it's clear that there hasn't been a detailed response prepared, right? So now in any good business is that you have to sort of plan for what are all the scenarios. Now, the people who are in control and in command and run good businesses, they've thought of all the scenarios and they just click from plan 1 to plan 2, depending on what's happening. Now, when you're running around trying to work out what the response is, then it makes it far more difficult. When you make decisions under stress, you typically make poor decisions, right? Your judgment's much poorer. Now, there's a physiological reason for that, so it's not just a hypothetical. It's actually a clinical fact that you don't make decisions as well when you're stressed. So that's why you've got to think about these things in the cold light of day. So in terms of the distress work we do with a lot of businesses, I have what I call an anger session, right? So I get the client in the room and I pretend to be the bank and I really rattle their cage and make them really upset. Now, the reason I do that is that when we have the real meeting, they're much calmer, right? So, and they know what the response can be. And I will take it further than the bank might politely anyway. So that's part of our kind of risk management and the disaster planning that we do from the clients we work with.
So a business at the moment that is looking for assistance, that's struggling to wade its way through all the information, that is keen to sort of, thinks it's got a model it can keep alive. How do they contact you, and what should their next steps be?
Well, they can contact us. They can contact me at jamie.holroyd, that's HOLROYD, at Stratosfear, STRATOSFEAR.com.au, or they can call me on 0422 907 902. But the thing we want in business is we want clarity. And at the moment, we don't have clarity. We don't know how long this is going to go. So I've spoken to a business person this morning who spends a lot of time in Italy, saying, well, in Italy, this has been running for about 4 months. So we have to expect it's going to run 4 months. Again, I'm no medical professional, Tom, but in Italy, they're coming from winter to summer. We're going from summer to winter, right? So we might be a bit longer. Some of the business people I talk to, and I don't want to spook the horses, but the scenarios are, does it last 6 months? Does it last 12 months? And God forbid, does it last 18 months, right? So that is an almost terrifying prospect. So Yeah, I think it's something we're just all got to deal with. So, look, now I want to try and focus on the positive because it's really easy to be negative. But what we're seeing in WA, that if you have a crisis overseas and people want stimulus, it's normally going to come in some sort of construction that's good for resources, good for WA. We certainly have customers in mining and mining services doing very well at the moment. Their pipelines are strong, strongest they've been in a couple of years. There's shortages of equipment. Now, part of that might be because equipment's harder to get into the country, might be because you've got to have less people per vehicle, but there's good signs there still. That bodes for more employment in that sector. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are other people doing okay as well, but it is certainly a very difficult time.
Yeah, difficult and interesting as always. Thanks, Jamie. We'll get another update from you. You've got lots and lots and lots of stuff coming through to process at the moment, and we'll get your advice in the next few days about what the latest is, because it's just such a fast-moving environment at the moment. It's pretty amazing just the way it's unfolding, to try and get your head around these not daily but hourly type announcements of changes and different regulations and different packages. There's been a lot of criticism of local government at this point in time. They've been very, very quiet and very inactive. In fact, the only thing I've seen so far was from the Karratha Council actually putting a package together, which is probably not the council you would expect. And we're not seeing a lot of leadership at that third tier of government at the moment. And they have a big part to play about pulling communities together, about really localising things, because everyone's back in their community. Everyone's operating from home. They're living from home. That's where they're shopping. Councils need to step up as well. Some of them are pretty well cashed up as well to be able to do something to help the local businesses that are around, and also inform the residents that are around the place. So I'm sure there'll be more pressure placed on local government to play their part in this whole, reassurance of the community about what's going on. And we'll speak to you very, very shortly.
Yeah, Tom, one thing I'll just tap on very quickly, and as we know we've got to keep these sessions relatively short, but I was out with a business only this morning, and it's pretty tough, but one of the directors, I went and saw him in his office, asking me how it was going, and it was clear the emotion was weighing heavy on him. The gentleman broke down. It was a very tough meeting. A lot of people under a lot of pressure. Just to remind business owners and directors out there that often when you're a business owner and a director, people think you're wealthy, right? They think you've got everything under control. Now, often you might be running a very large business, but it might not be as profitable as people think, right? And there's a lot of pressure. There's lots to think about. I kind of liken it's like when you have a new baby, right? It's just constant, right? And it does wear people down. So if anyone is out there feeling under pressure, can I ask them that they please seek help? They speak to Beyond Blue or some sort of counselling service. A lot of the banks have some counselling services as well. A lot of the chambers of commerce, or people can ring us. But please be understanding to some of those people under a lot of pressure. Also, in the last couple of days, I know that people are not across how the bank works exactly, but particularly a small business manager might have 3,000 customers that they deal with or look after. I can guarantee you, like Monday week, they probably got 3,000 phone calls. So we know that there's a massive human cost that these people are trying to deal with that. So just please keep that in mind.
Yeah, both valid points, and people's health and well-being. Certainly, lots and lots of comments on social media about the human cost of what's going to come out of this, aside from the economic and the health cost, but the human cost, I think, is going to be pretty significant. Always good to chat.
Not alone, and it's not your fault, right? And it's other people going through similar things, so just keep things in perspective. And look, I kind of have the view, focus on what you can control, be concerned about what you can influence, and everything else, don't worry about it, because you just got to focus your energy on it.
Yeah, good advice.
Anyway, Tom, I've got to run because we have a massive pipeline of work we need to get done, so thank you very much again for your time. And if anyone wants to give us a call, please give me a call, 0422 907 902.
Good on you. Jamie Holroyd from Stratosfear. We'll be back with some more advice from Jamie very, very soon.